A man walks into a cafe with his dog, but the waiter comes up and says to him, "I'm sorry, you won't be able to have your dog in here." "But it's my seeing eye dog." Oh, well, in that case, that's okay. First cup of coffee's on us. A couple of minutes later, another man walks in with his dog. The first man goes up to him and says, "You won't be able to have your dog in here unless you say it's your seeing eye dog." "Oh, okay." The waiter comes up to the second man and says, "I'm sorry, you can't have your dog in here." "But it's my seeing eye dog." "I'm sorry, but they don't use chihuahuas as seeing eye dogs." "What? They gave me a chihuahua?" Oh my gosh, who's lying? And who's not? Who's blind and who's not? Today I want us to open our eyes as seeing eye people, with these eyes and the eyes of the heart and mind. I want to bring to you today some of the stark realities of the prison world in Victoria and the amazing work of Prison Fellowship as a God-empowered, God-loving enterprise. Thanks very much for your company here. I came very early today just to settle in, and it is really good to meet you. And I thank you for your generosity in giving your time to me to share about our work. Yes, I am an Anglican clergyman. I'm married to Wendy. I have 3 children and 4 grandchildren, and I've just turned 80. So I'm actually quite proud about it. And I am very involved in theatre, good movies, gardening, dancing, reading, and of course, family is big time. Now, 10 years ago, I didn't give a rat's thought for prisoners or the prison world. To me, they were totally invisible, out of my mind altogether. Then, about 8 years ago, I met a man called David Greer, who'd been visiting prisoners for 10 years up until that time, and he needed a new partner to visit prison with him. And I prayed about it. In the end, I said yes, that would be wonderful. And so I had a tremendous time in prison with him. I met so many prisoners, and it was a great challenge, but maybe the most challenging time of my life, I think, but also the most enjoyable in many ways, as you shall see. So now, instead of not giving a rat's thought to them, I have a heartfelt commitment to their retrieval, to their rehabilitation, to their restoration, whatever word you want to use. I'd like you to meet Pam. Pam had a childhood of trauma and torment. She had an alcoholic father who constantly violated her mother and threatened to do the same with her if she intervened, which was very often. So she copped it with bruises and so on and so on. Her life was well and truly scuttled. When she turned 15, she realised she could make a decision, which was to leave home. And she joined a gang. Well, for her, it was a good place to be. She was accepted, protected, and she had a vision, which was a mission, which was to go out and hit other people before they hit her. Makes sense, doesn't it, for her at that time? Well, over the next 20 years, she belonged to 5 gangs and 5 prisons. And then at the end of that time, she had come to the end of her tether. She did not know what to do next. I want you to imagine her in her cell, late at night. She gets down on her knees and she prays a prayer. "Lord, if you are real, I need you to be so for me right now." And that's what she did. And a few minutes later, she got up and later told people this is what it was like for her. If you want to close your eyes, that may help you. "I was standing under a waterfall and everything dirty was being washed away and I was clean, really clean, for the first time in my life. I'm not afraid anymore. God's got my back now. He brought me to prison and now I'm free." So imagine this woman of 40, 35, for so long she had a life of torment and fear and violence. And then, on the one night, she meets God. And her life from there on in was totally different from the first 15 years. Now that is music to the ears of prison fellowship, believe me. I was a master, a political hardball, able to manipulate and execute the dirty tricks that often come with the political process. I was truly a nasty piece of work. These are the words of a man most of you will remember called Charles Colson. Remember Watergate?
Yep.
And he tells that he's written a wonderful book called Born Again. But he gives a description of what happened. He said, something was wrong in my life, something more than Watergate. As I got into my car, the hatchet man, or so the press called me, crumbled in a flood of tears, unable to drive, calling out to God with the first honest prayer of my life. That was the night Jesus Christ came into my life. So he gets into the car as Nixon's man, gets out of the car, Christ's man. What a miracle. Well, the miracle led to so much in his life. God took him by the scruff of the neck and cast him into the kingdom of heaven. And then the law came along, took him by the scruff and bundled him into prison, jail. And he was there for only 8 months. I don't know why it wasn't longer than that. 8 months. And during that time, yes, he wrote his book called Born Again, an amazing book of his conversion and his life. Many prisoners were converted through his ministry in prison. But most of all, the thing that he's most remembered for is that he worked to reform the prison reform system. Okay? The prison reform system. And that's ongoing to this day in many countries of the world. Just an incredible man. What he began was called Prison Fellowship, and it became Prison Fellowship International, which is by now the largest prison visiting operation in the world by far. We're in over 120 countries and growing all the time. It is truly an organisation for me to be very much proud of. Now, a big, bald, brawny man with lots of bravado came to the first session of a course in Mark's Gospel in prison, Melbourne Assessment Prison, for prisoners to learn more about Jesus Christ. So he comes into the first session, sits down, and at the end of the session he comes up to the front. He says, this is a religious group, is it? I think you're just a bunch of fruitcakes, religious nuts and fruitcakes. You're not going to see me again. Beginning of the second session, in he walks with a man just like him, very big and burly and bold, right? And sits down next to him. By the end of the second session, he comes out to the front again. And this time he says, I've never been in a place where I've been loved so much before. And the other guy who came into him walked up to him and put his head on his shoulder, and they were both in tears. That's music to the ears of Prison Fellowship, and certainly to mine and David's. You see, they meet a man in Mark's Gospel who was despised, rejected, betrayed, accused, arrested, tried, sentenced, punished, a life lost. And these guys said, that man's been through what we have been through in our lives. He'd understand us. And when they learn that he died, was resurrected and sent the Holy Spirit, and they realise he's alive today, they come to Christianity in droves all around the world. And one bunch of guys, 12 motorcyclists, all came to this session, and at the end they all graduated from that course, Christians. Wonderful, just a wonderful experience. You see, they identify with Jesus in the Gospels, and they know that he identifies, they identify with him. So it's a flagship project for us, and it's working all around the world at this stage. Now, do we have any bank robbers here today? What? Not one?
What's that?
Oh, you are? Oh.
I robbed my kitty, my piggy.
Oh, she robs her kitty. Any tax dodgers here?
Whoa.
You said,
I say, whoa.
Okay, any liars here?
No.
Oh, we're all liars, aren't we? I love lists, and I wrote down a list of 20 ways in which we can lie. And I didn't realise that I could lie without even being aware of it. And it was a tremendous exercise in prayer for me to be aware of the ways in which I lie. Some of them very subtle, some of them minute actually, but they were still lies. Mary Kay Beard was a bank robber and a tax dodger and a liar. She loved robbing banks all over the eastern states of America late last century. She got in with the mafia and they worked together on grand larcenies and they had a terrific time and they made a lot of money. They were very, very successful. But then one day she wanted to double cross them. They discovered that, and before they could murder her, she was arrested, convicted and sentenced to 21 years jail. Deservedly, I'd say. 21. In the 16th year of her imprisonment, she was flipping through the Gideon's Bible. You know those, don't you? Flipping through the Bible, and she came to Ezekiel. Now in Ezekiel, the prophet in the Old Testament, he's declaring God's promise to restore Israel after the return of the exiles from Babylon. Right? So we have a case here of, I will give you, in chapter 36, God says, I will give you a new heart and a new spirit I will put within you. That really hit home to her, so she said, you do that for me, God, and I'll give the rest of my life back to you. And to prove that she did it, not that she was just saying it, to prove that she believed it, she acted in this way. For the next 20 years, she arranged from within prison, setting up Christmas trees all over shopping centres in the eastern states of America, with a gospel message on the trees and an offer of $30 for whom? Prisoners?
Yep.
Well, no. Prisoners' families. Prisoners' children. I can tell you, most prisoners' families and children suffer worse than the prisoners do. Not all, but many, many do. They do time as well. So the $30 gift was for Angel Tree. Every Christmas in Victoria, we provide a gift from the father, usually the father in prison, to the child, right, for Christmas. And for many of them, they'd never received a gift in their lives before. So it was a wonderful, wonderful thing for them. You know, the stigma and the shame and the solitariness of being the child of a prisoner. Bullied at school, sometimes even bullied by teachers. There are some truly amazing stories. Clarissa's dad was jailed when she was just 4 years of age. So she hardly ever knew him out of prison at all. She was bullied at school, and then one day her dad gave her, we send the gifts into prison, and the children come into the prison, and the fathers give them the gift. And this particular woman, Clarissa, she said, getting a gift from Dad, I could not believe it. And I knew at that moment that I was loved by him. In one action, that I was loved by him. So today, she says, and she's about 20 now, she said, when I buy an Angel Tree gift, I remember when I was a kid, and it brought me great joy. Great joy. And I've enjoyed that joy, if you like, ever since that time when my father gave me that gift. Set free, she said. There are 7,000 human beings in cages right now in Victoria. Today, tomorrow, next day, every year. 7,000 in cages. That's a lot, isn't it?
Yes.
95% of them are men. Not surprised, are you? I'm not surprised at all. Half of them, when they're released, return within 2 years. So they go out and commit more crimes, and within 2 years they're back in again. But what is a more monstrous statistic is that half of them are in remand. Do you know what remand means? Remand means they're in prison, some on bail, in prison, They're waiting to be tried. Some of them can wait for 2. In some cases, I heard recently, a man waited for 7 years before he was tried. Whether he was guilty or not, he suffered in prison for that long. And half of them are waiting. Over 3,000 of them today in Victorian prisons are waiting to be tried. They've not been shown to be guilty or innocent. It's the same with Greg Lynn. Now, David Greer, my close friend, meets Greg Lynn every week. He's the one who was supposedly have murdered the 2 older women in the high country about 2 years ago. Remember that?
Yep.
And that's waiting to happen now. But it may be another 1, 2, 3 years before he's actually tried, which is incredible, isn't it? Okay, so the other thing is the incarceration rate is not only high and getting higher, but it's especially high among Indigenous Australians, especially in Northern Territory, as you might imagine. So the whole prison system is clogged and it's antiquated and in tremendous need of reform. And whether it's going to happen or not, I do not know. Our politicians don't electioneer around prison, do they? Preparing for an election, you ever hear them talk about prisons? We are so far behind, and especially the juvenile system. Hopefully we're going to increase the minimum age for jailing from 10 to 14. I think it should be even higher than 14, but there we go. Okay, now, the most important thing we do is prison visiting. I'm going to look through my bars here now, and we have 200 or 300 visitors to prisons right now in Victoria. And believe it or not, half of them are over 50. And some of them have been visiting prisoners for 20 and 30 years. And their stories of how prisoners have been converted, convicted, and won over to the Lord is just incredible. The responses can be quite varied. Let me see now. Oh, can we be friends, Mark? Yes. Thank you. Right. What about you, sir? Can we be friends? You say yes, right. Anyone want to say no? Because there are prisoners who do say no. Yes. You're going to say yes too, right? Who wants to say no? Looks like you might say no. No? Oh. Not many no's? Well, there are many no's. Now, let's go to Brazil, which has been in the news a lot lately. My son is in Rio at the moment, and I'm going to take you to a state of Minas Gerais, where one of the most developed prisons in the world is. Now, at this prison of 10,000 men and women, mostly men again, they chose 1,700 of them who had been in prison for 5 years, and their families had to live in the city where the prison was, and they were offered a time of learning. We are going to teach you what it means to be loved. And at the end of the first year, they were offered the keys of the prison. You can leave if you like, or you can stay. Would you rather leave or learn more about being loved? 90% of them stayed. And of the 10% who left, half of them came back again without committing a crime in order to be part of this program. Isn't that incredible?
Yeah.
Of course, the program offered things like work therapy, sports courts, gardens, art, bakery, workshops, knitting, pottery, the lot. So they were given tremendous privileges and tremendous opportunities, right? But they had to stay for that. They had the 5 years already, and then another year. And every month they were locked up for 1 month, for one day, and offered coffee and donuts through the bars, just to remind them that they were still prisoners. But that didn't worry them that they were prisoners. We may as well be here as anywhere else. In fact, considering Brazil, better here than anywhere else. And all these men and women deserved redemption. You can argue, I suppose, that none of us deserve redemption, but in this case, these men earned it, if you like. They responded from deep within their hearts, no longer responding to a criminal urge again. I have a bunch of 10 homemade biscuits, and every Easter we give a bunch of 10 to every prisoner in Victoria. How many biscuits is that?
7,000.
70,000. Oh, you've got a mathematician here. 70,000 biscuits every Easter. You can imagine all the kitchens and church kitchens around Victoria who make baking biscuits right up to that time. Every year, 700 prisoners, I won't say criminals, they're not all criminals, right? Prisoners get a bag of biscuits and they love them. Some of them will wait and not eat them all at once because they never get anything like this. Why are you coming here giving us these? Why aren't you out in the world? Why would you bother about us? You know, we're not men that you should be associating with. And of course, once they ask that question, we give the reasons why we go into prison, because Jesus has called us in just to love you, whether you respond or not. And we don't proselytise unless they ask us first. And then we do it with gentleness and wisdom. And we hear their stories. And the part of the stories that they want to tell. Hardly any of them will say what they've done. But they'll say a lot of other things around the crime that they've committed, if they have committed one. And we also have children's camps every year. The children of prisoners. When they go to the camp, they're very apprehensive. Most have never been to a camp before in their lives. Never. But when they come home, they're shouting and screaming in the bus, "We want to come back next year, Murray. We want to come back next year. This is the best week of our lives." So the children's camp, that's a wonderful thing. We have slam. Slam is sports for prisoners. We go into some prisons and we play netball, basketball, footy, all those sports in some of the country prisons. And the other thing called T24 is we find out who's leaving prison, and we have people in Prison Fellowship International who will meet them at the gate, right? And they're with them for 24 hours. They have to agree to have someone with them for 24 hours, but they need to always say yes. And for that 24 hours, they can go to accommodation place, or like maybe Odyssey House. They can go to a cafe, or even a pub, actually, for some. Their home, or whatever it might be. And then after the 24 hours, they are then monitored and mentored for the next year. Okay. I have to say the churches hardly ever take ex-prisoners. They have a very bad name among churches, and so I find it very hard to get jobs like these in churches unless I work very, very hard to win people over to invite me. So that's the way it is. T24, that's called. Now, let me show you something. You've heard of ball and chain, haven't you? Yep. Well, this is a ball. This is a big, bad ball, and it's a big, bad, damaging ball. And I want to imagine this ball in an alleyway, and there are 10 pins at the other end. 10.
Yep.
10 pins. A prisoner's 10 pins. And I send this ball down the alley, and it goes into these pins. Dysfunctional family, poor education, bad company, add to that peer pressure, and what do you get? Drugs, drink and violence.
Yeah.
Mental damage, genetics, personality type, bad choices often. So imagine all 10 pins are knocked down into the alley, right, into the gutters. And you think, if you or I had even 2 or 3 of our pins knocked down, especially if they're close together, we find it hard to cope, don't we? Something tragic goes on, traumatic in your life, you have to cope with it. Imagine all 10 pins being knocked down over a period of time. What we try and do in Prison Fellowship International is to put the pins back up again, right? And there are 5 ways we do that. We want them to see the damage that they've done to the victims. So they sit across a table. This has been tried more than ever these days. The victim and the victimiser talking together. So they can see, the victimiser can see the harm that he's done to the families. And for some of them, that hits them really hard. So that's one of them. The second one is experiencing forgiveness. Oh, what's that? Grace. Oh, grace, what is that? Faith? What's faith? Never heard the word before. There are so many uneducated prisoners that they don't know words that we use that are central to our lives. Never heard of the words before. So education is very important for prisoners. And there's not a great deal of that in prisons anyway. There's not the money. The third one is anger management. Now, I can say very safely that all of us here today are angry about something. But we don't necessarily express it, or in ways that are creative. And I believe there are ways to harness anger. I'm angry about many, many things. And I'm sure you are if you think about it. Anyway, that's another one. Anger management for prisoners. The next one is restoring levels of mental health. Now, the mind is a formidable jailer. And it's very easy to get mentally unbalanced, isn't it? You may think of a time in your life when anxiety or shame or guilt or unresolved grief, really got to you. Unforgiveness and so on and so on. It goes on and on. So that's another one. Then there's this one. I sat next to a murderer one day, and he was shaking in his shoes, and he was looking up at the ceiling, and he was just shaking. I'm going to be here for 20 years, he said. 20 years. Oh, right. So, how long have you been here? 2 weeks. Mm-hmm. What about your children? No idea what's happened to them. Your wife? Oh, she died 2 weeks ago. Get it? So I sat next to this man, this murderer. For a few seconds it was hard to sit next to him. But then what washed over me was the hatred of what he had done. He had stabbed her many, many times. I hated what he did, but I loved him. I had compassion for him, that he was going to be in for 20 years. And would he have to suffer 20 years like that after murdering his wife? So I hated what he did, but I loved this as a man. And it taught me that I can love anybody, no matter what they've done. And Jesus even said, if you hate your brother, you've already committed murder. You don't have to commit a real murder, it can be in your head murder. Difficult teaching of Jesus, huh? Anyway, many prisoners learn that with one hand they can kill somebody, but with the other hand they can do artwork. And every year we have an exhibition of artwork by prisoners and ex-prisoners. They're not Michelangelo's, but they do great work, and they write descriptions of why they painted the particular painting that they did. Okay. 3 men on a hill. And these 3 men are all hanging. And the man on the right hurls insults at the man in the middle. But the man on the left, he was a thief, said, remember me when you come into your kingdom. And the man on the right says, you made your bed, you sleep in it. No. He said, today you will be with me in paradise. So here's the man's faith and the man in the middle's grace. Put those 2 things together, and then you realise that Jesus on the cross was in the tiniest prison ever. He could not move forward or backwards, sideways, up or down. Nailed to his prison, so that we might no longer be prisoners to our crimes, our sins, our transgressions, and our flaws. It's an amazing story of the cross, isn't it?
Yeah.
The difference that has made for us, and if we're a Christian, to us. Incredible. He foots the bill. That's what it's about, isn't it? He foots the bill for us. Past, present, and future. Now, I've got a book here, Why Forgive. There are copies out there for you to have while you're having morning tea. Why Forgive is the story of, it's a book of 30 stories of transformation by prisoners. How their lives were changed by Christ. 30 of them. The book is free, but we would ask you to make a donation to put in the box out there, and promise to either read it yourself and or give it to somebody else. Make that fair? Why Forgive? A tremendous book. We also have a magazine which we put out every 3 months called Set Free, with amazing stories there from Ukraine and elsewhere too. Now this is called chain breakers. For 50 cents a day, that's 3 cups of coffee a month, right? You can contribute to our work. That's one way of doing it. There are others, but I want you to consider that. Consider becoming a prison visitor as well. And also at the back on the table there's a form for you to fill in which asks you to be part of the prayer ministry. Nothing can happen without prayer. In Acts chapter 16, Paul and Silas, they're in prison, and the church is praying for them strenuously, earnestly, are 2 different translations of that word. And because of that, the story, as you know, is filled with angels and guards all over the place. The miracle happens, and they're both released from prison. So prayer is very important to us. And if you'd like to receive our prayer diary and pray for us regularly, all you've got to do is fill out this form and give it to me at the end of the day. Does that make sense to you? Okay. Just going back again very quickly to the book Why Forgive. Some of the chapter headings will give you an idea. Ending the cycle of hatred. That's hard to do if you have intergenerational crime. A lot of criminals as such come from criminal families. They from criminal families as well. Bless your persecutors. Love your enemy. Forgiveness and justice. When reconciling is impossible. And so on. Accepting responsibility. Not a step but a journey. And so on and so on. Okay. Now, this message will not self-destruct. There is no silver bullet. It's likely to be the same or worse in 5 years' time. And I can't imagine any government in Australia, any government or any party, making that much difference to such a huge issue as the prison world. But I do want to say, finishing, is that we are to be seeing-eye people. And even though I've portrayed a very dark picture of prisons, and it is dark, let me tell you, not always, mostly dark, very dark, there is a light shining in that darkness. It's the light of Christ in that place. Those places, in any of our 15 prisons in Victoria. So I want you to remember that that's the good news, that Christ is in prison, where Christians go. And they go as volunteers. And remember finally, you don't have to go to prison to be behind bars, do you? Do I?
No.
You don't. If you look at your own life, all the difficulties that you faced, all the issues you've never resolved, sins of all the sins you've ever committed, you might not even remember them now. You may have forgotten them. They are there, and we can still be in prison, right? And we will be until the day we die, when Christ will release all of his people from any kind of prison, whether it's
There's also been a lot of stabbings in Melbourne as well. That on the news, there's been a lot of stabbings and people putting in jail for stabbing people.
Channel 7 News every night is a crime and crash show. Crime and crash, nearly every item. So the public are exposed to a vast amount of crime, all over the place. Crime, television series, I'm a movie buff, there are lots of movies with crime as its basic format. It's just so big. And so people are deluged with crime every day, and so their attitude towards criminals gets worse and worse and worse, right?
Yeah.
They deserve what they get, etc., etc., etc. And you can argue that case. And there may be some people here today who argue that case. That they deserve all they get. Why on earth would we waste our time going into prisons? I do not believe that now. I did 10 years ago, but never now or in the future. So thank you for listening, and just pray that